The drive belts transmit power from a powered pulley out to the accessories. Now, there are two layouts of belts that you're going to see. We've got this one, the classic layout. We have multiple belts driving different accessories like the alternator and a power steering pump. And you'll also come across a more modern system called a Serpentine belt, where a single belt powers all the accessories. So let's take a brief look at what came before to understand why Serpentine belt systems are the best thing ever in the history of drive belts. Drive belts have been around for thousands of years. The very first drive belts were flat. They were made from fabric or leather, but their grip was limited and they had a tendency to wander off the pulleys, and strong belts had to be very wide. Then came round belts and ropes, which fitted into a groove on a pulley. Now these still had a tendency to slip and they could rotate around on themselves, getting twisted up. Mills had massive engines and transmitting huge amounts of power was a challenge. Mill engineers discovered that a series of ropes in multiple grooves across a drum was more effective at transmitting power than a single flat belt of the same width. Then came vee-belts. Now these solved the alignment and the twisting issues because the belt self-centers in the groove on the pulley. And more importantly, these belts had a much stronger grip because the shape is basically a wedge, and with some tension and the correct sized groove, the belt will wedge itself into the groove. And the more the load, the stronger the load, the more the belt is going to grip into this groove. The endless vee-belt, this is one, was developed in 1917 by John Gates, whose company, Gates, is still a massive manufacturer of belt systems and rubber hoses, all things rubber basically. The grip of a belt depends partly on the tension in the belt, but also to a large degree on the surface area that's in contact with the pulley. V-shaped belts like this were standard for driving car accessories until, I don't know, probably the 80s or so. Increasing the size of the V-belt profile made for a thicker belt. You had a larger surface area, and the thicker this belt becomes, the harder it is to turn around tight corners. Plus, you can't really bend a V-belt back on itself, so V-belts were limited to fairly simple shaped routes around the engine, and this is why engines used multiple belts for the different accessories. Now the successor to the V-belt is the multi-groove belt or the polygroove belt. Some people call it a ribbed belt, and it's basically been the universal way of driving accessories since the 80s. What you can immediately see is this ribbed belt is much thinner than a V-belt, but it maintains the same surface area. If we turn this inside out, we can see that the polygroove belt is made up of lots of little V profiles, in this case 4, side by side. And this way it has the advantages of being self-centering and the wedging action of a V-belt. And the surface area is made up of all these little V profiles added together. And the surface area gripping the pulley is going to be the same as a big V-belt. But this ribbed belt doesn't need to be as thick as this one. And since it's thinner, it can make much tighter turns around the engine bay. This design enabled manufacturers to run the belt in a much more convoluted route and to power more accessories. And because the back of the belt is flat, it can be rerouted around with idler pulleys, and it can even drive light accessories using the back of the belt. This sort of belt system is known as a serpentine belt because it's like a snake or a serpent, and it snakes its way around the engine. There are two types of belt on this engine. Let's just take a second to note the difference between a drive belt and a timing belt. Now, the drive belt has ribs that run lengthwise and it transmits power, but we don't care about keeping these accessories in sync with each other. This is known as an asynchronous drive system because the timing just isn't important. The timing belt, on the other hand, has ribs running crossways that lock into these grooves on the pulleys, and they keep the timing pulleys locked relative to each other. The timing system is a synchronous drive system because everything is beautifully synchronized. This MX-5 Miata has two drive belts, both using the standard multi-groove belt profile. One powers the alternator and the water pump, and the other runs the power steering pump and an AC compressor if we had one. And that's an important thing. Be careful ordering drive belts because the length of the belt needed is often going to depend on the configuration of the engine. Now, these aren't Serpentine belts. I'd call them drive belts or accessory belts, and in the UK at least, it's still common to hear them called fan belts because they used to drive the vehicle's fan. Now, all fans are electric, but the name has stuck for some reason. Now, a Serpentine belt is a kind of drive belt where a single belt drives all the accessories in a convoluted route, and the successor to this Miata engine uses a Serpentine belt. They're much more common nowadays. The belt is just one part of the accessory belt drive system. The other part is some form of tensioner and possibly some idler gears on a Serpentine system to route the belt around the engine. Now, on this engine, the belt is tensioned manually. The alternator belt is tensioned by screwing the alternator away from the engine block, putting a tension onto the belt. Likewise, the power steering pump is done the same way. And as the belt wears, it will lengthen, and it's possible that the tension needs to be adjusted. We saw an automatic tensioner on the timing belt system. It's an idler pulley that uses a spring to apply a constant tension on the belt. This is the same system that's used in a Serpentine belt system. On the front of the engine will be a spring-loaded tensioner that keeps the belt at the correct tension. And with a Serpentine belt system, the functioning of this automatic tensioner is just as important as the belt itself. And generally, the tensioner should be replaced at the same time as the belt, and they'll probably come as a kit. So, the Serpentine belt has a few advantages, which is why it's become the standard on modern engines. There's only a single belt and a single tensioner to deal with. And you can see that on this engine, if the alternator belt needs to be replaced, then we have to pull off the power steering belt to get to it. The engine can also be made more compact, with the accessories pulled in much tighter to the block, and those accessories can be mounted more simply because they don't need to swivel and apply tension to the belt. But the one disadvantage is that if the Serpentine belt fails, then all the accessory systems are lost at the same time. The alternator, coolant pump, power steering, all gone. Let's get in for a closer look at the belt. Now, unusually for the automotive industry, these multi-rib belts are very standard across the whole industry, and they pretty much all use the same spacing or pitch of the ribs. There's actually an industry standard code printed on all these belts. There's also a manufacturer's code, but the number we're interested in is what's called the PK number. Why is it called the PK number? Well, it has the letters PK in it. Now, the first number in there represents the number of ribs on our belt. So in our case, we have 4 ribs. There's 4 ribs on here. 6 is also common. This belt has 5. So that tells you the number of ribs. The last number is the effective length of this belt in millimeters. And the PK, that means that this is a standard automotive belt. If you're working on a ship or a hovercraft, then you're going to see different letters there, but PK is standard for automotive belts. The profile of the belt is designed so that there's a bit of clearance between the bottoms of the ribs and the pulley, and this allows for a channel along which water can escape when the belt is wet or the pulley is wet, and it stops the belt from hydroplaning and slipping on a film of water. Now, the belt is made up of some sort of tough backing and the ribbed section, which is made of a flexible, high friction material, kind of like rubber, although more modern materials will be neoprene or EPDM. Belts used to wear by cracking along the ribs, but newer EPDM belts tend not to crack. Just like tyres wear down on the road and they lose a bit of rubber, the belt wears down running over the pulleys. And this wear will reduce the clearance between the belt and the bottom of the grooves in the pulley, and it stops the belt from wedging so firmly into the grooves. Now, with a belt that cracks, the general rule was, and still is, that a belt should be replaced if there is more than 3 cracks in a 3-inch section. Now, with a belt that doesn't crack, like this EPDM stuff, you can't see at a glance how worn the belt is. So there are tools available, basically little gauges, that fit into these rubs. They fit into these ribs and show if a belt is worn, but you're better off and you're fine to go off the mileage. These belts should be inspected every 60,000 miles and replaced about every 90,000. And when you're inspecting the belts, you've got to take the belt off and check any tensioners or any idlers for play. Because this is an important thing. The Serpentine system it's a whole system and not just a belt. Now, a worn belt is going to slip, and you might hear a belt squeal as the first symptom. Belt slippage is bad, okay? Reduced power transmission, that squealing noise, and as soon as the belt starts slipping, is going to get damaged much faster. And as the belt slips on the pulleys, particularly on the alternator, it generates heat from the friction of slipping, and that friction, that heat, can damage the bearings inside the accessories. And as we talked about with alternators, if the belt is slipping, then eventually you'll see the battery light come on to show you that the alternator isn't producing enough charge. If you've got problems with anything that's driven by the belt, power steering, aircon, alternator, water pump, your first check should be the belt system. One other thing to watch for is the alignment of the pulleys. Now, all the pulleys for a belt should be in a perfect line so that the belt runs neatly across the grooves without drifting from side to side. Now, with the engine running, you should be able to look down sideways at a belt and see that it's not wobbling or wavering on a pulley from side to side. So there we have it, drive belts. In summary, check at 60,000 miles, replace them at 90,000 miles, always eat a good breakfast, and be suspicious of the tensioner anytime there's a fault with an accessory. Guys, if you enjoy massive detail on car parts and a series that takes you in a structured way from A to Z of cars so that you understand each part and not just a basic of that part but the real fine details like we've just talked about, get yourself over to howacarworks.com. We've got a whole series of these videos in a smart, sensible order that really take you from a beginning understanding of cars right through to physics, not too much physics, all the way up until we've built a whole car basically. So come on over there, you're going to enjoy it a lot and learn some stuff. A lot of stuff.